You mentioned Karen, and while I was reading it, you tell about that very often in my parts of the world, people very often ask, why me? But then at those kind of instances, Karen would say, why not me? Could you elaborate a bit on why she said that and how she came to say such a thing? Why not me? Why shouldn't I be suffering?
Yes, well, I mean, Karen was a counselor as well as a Bible teacher, and she was always, I guess, like me, although we came from different backgrounds, very conscious of the fact that we were, relatively speaking, very privileged people. And that when we looked at many around us, I mean, suffering was just part of their lot. And so why should we as Christians expect to be somehow exempt or spared the suffering that is the common lot of humanity? So she never understood this question. Sort of people ask, why me, when they go through some tragedy? Because tragedy is part and parcel of most people's lives, and every single human being at some point in his or her life is going to experience grief.
Is the Western Church forgetting lament and suffering to its own detriment, always trying to provide clear-cut answers that don't take into account the messiness of the world and the way God acts?
Yes, I think many of us work with the Bible within the Bible, and we avoid those parts of the Bible that actually are very difficult, very challenging. If you take the Psalms, which was the hymn book of early Israel, more than a third of the Psalms are Psalms of lament, or Psalms expressing not only sorrow, but anger and protesting to God, complaining to God, asking the question, God, why are you silent in the face of such rampant and prolonged injustice? Why do evildoers triumph?
Mm-hmm.
And we hardly ever use those Psalms in our worship, let alone in our preaching. And we somehow approach the world as if we Christians have all the answers. And yet we should first approach the world with empathy and feel the pain and the suffering that many go through, and share in solidarity with them before we start thinking with them about, how do we understand and articulate God's presence and God's work in such a suffering world. So yes, I think that apologetics, like I said before, is often very superficial. It doesn't convince or persuade people who are experiencing often the worst forms of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Christians should never separate apologetics from ethics in the sense of actually looking at the way we live and asking, is the way we live showing solidarity with those who suffer? Is it addressing the causes of unjust suffering in the world? Because if our way of life is not addressing those causes of suffering, then our apologetics sometimes can be seen as hypocritical.